The boardroom of Caldwell and Hargrove Capital smelled like leather chairs and old money, and every single person in it was laughing at the woman sitting alone at the far end of the table. Her name was Celeste Okafor. She was 31 years old. She was wearing a blazer she had bought at a Value Village in Brampton 2 winters ago, and her hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it looked severe. She had taken the GO train that morning because her car was in the shop. She had eaten a granola bar for breakfast because she had forgotten to buy groceries. To the 11 people laughing at her in that room, she looked like someone who had wandered in off the street. Her husband Vincent Hargrove was doing most of the laughing. "Celeste, please," he said, straightening the cuffs of his Italian suit. He was the kind of handsome that came from money. Sharp jaw, expensive haircut, the easy careless confidence of a man who had never once wondered whether he belonged in a room. "You don't have to be here. This is a board meeting. For the board." "I know what a board meeting is, Vincent," Celeste said. Her voice was quiet. It was always quiet. The woman sitting directly beside Vincent, his new girlfriend Renata, a marketing consultant from Yorkville with an elaborate set of gel nails and a perfume that cost more than Celeste's monthly grocery budget, covered her mouth and looked away, not because she was embarrassed, because she was trying not to smile too wide. "She came here in a raincoat," Renata whispered to the CFO, a man named Douglas, who had worked at Caldwell and Hargrove for 22 years and still somehow found it acceptable to snicker. Vincent leaned back in his chair. "Look," he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of manufactured patience, "the separation agreement gives you access to shared accounts until the end of the month. It doesn't give you a seat at this table." "Legal has been very clear on that." "Legal has been very clear," Celeste repeated. She wrote something on the notepad in front of her. Nobody could see what it was. "You built nothing here, Celeste." Vincent's voice dropped, the way it always did when he wanted to sound reasonable and be cruel at the same time. "I'm saying that with respect. You were a homemaker. You supported the family while I built this firm. That was your contribution. We're grateful for it." The settlement reflects that. The settlement was $450,000, which sounded substantial until you understood that Caldwell and Hargrove Capital managed nearly $3 billion in assets, that Vincent had quietly restructured his equity holdings 18 months before filing for divorce, and that the family home in Oakville, which Celeste had renovated almost single-handedly, sourcing contractors, managing timelines, overseeing every detail while Vincent flew to Edinburgh for golf weekends, had been appraised at a figure that made Celeste's own lawyer go pale. $450, her lawyer had said, looking at the offer across a desk in a Mississauga office building. "For a 12-year marriage." "I know," Celeste had said. "Celeste, I know," she said again, and she smiled, and the smile was the thing that had unsettled her lawyer more than anything else. That had been 6 weeks ago. In the boardroom, Douglas the CFO cleared his throat. "Maybe we should move on to the agenda," he suggested. "That's a good idea," Celeste said pleasantly. She folded her hands on the table. "Before you do, I have a question. Does the name Lakeshore Advisory Group mean anything to anyone here?" The room shifted. It was subtle, a slight tightening around Vincent's eyes, a pause in Douglas's performance of patience. "I'm not familiar with that name," Vincent said. "That's funny," Celeste said. "Because Lakeshore Advisory has been accumulating a quiet position in Caldwell and Hargrove preferred shares for the past 14 months. Started right around the time you filed for divorce, actually. Coincidental timing, Celeste, and I ask because," she continued, opening the leather folder she'd carried in, pulling out a single sheet of paper. "I am Lakeshore Advisory Group." She placed the document on the table and slid it across the polished mahogany surface. Nobody laughed after that. The story of how Celeste Okafor arrived at that boardroom, at that table, with that single sheet of paper, begins not with rage and not with revenge. It begins with a Tuesday afternoon in February 7 years earlier, in a coffee shop on King Street West, where a 24-year-old woman with a finance degree from Western, and a job offer from 2 Bay Street firms was eating a breakfast sandwich and reading a book on equity derivatives. Vincent Hargrove sat down across from her without asking. She had known him a little through mutual friends. He was charming in the way of men who had learned early that charm was a form of leverage. He was starting his own capital firm, he told her. He had seed money from his father and 2 institutional investors. He needed, he said, someone brilliant. Celeste had looked at him over her coffee cup. "You need capital and a competent operational structure," she said. "You don't need brilliant, you need organized and relentless." Vincent had smiled. "Okay, are you organized and relentless?" "I'm both of those things and I'm also brilliant," she said. "But I'm not coming to work for you." He had laughed. He had not expected that. Men like Vincent Hargrove rarely met people who declined them. She didn't go to work for him. She went to work for a mid-sized investment firm in the financial district, where she spent 4 years learning every corner of capital allocation, portfolio structuring, and the kind of institutional relationship management that didn't show up in textbooks. She was good at it in the way that some people are good at a language. Not because they studied grammar, but because they heard music in it that nobody else did. She and Vincent dated for a year, got married in a small ceremony at his family's property in Muskoka, and moved into a house in Oakville that she had found, negotiated, and signed the papers on while Vincent was in Calgary for a conference. The plan, loosely, was that she would continue working while Vincent got the firm established, and then they would reassess. The reassessment never came. There was always another reason it wasn't the right time. The firm needed more infrastructure. They were trying to get pregnant. Then she was pregnant, and then she wasn't, and the year after that loss was the hardest year of her life. And somewhere inside it she'd stopped fighting for the reassessment and started just getting through the days. She renovated the house. She built a vegetable garden that took over most of the backyard. She sat on the board of a small community foundation and quietly doubled their endowment over 3 years by restructuring their investment policy. Nobody at Caldwell and Hargrove knew she'd done that, because Vincent had never asked and she had never mentioned it, and that silence, she understood later, was the first brick in the wall he built around his idea of who she was. She was 30 years old when she found the hotel receipt. It was not, as it turned out, the first one. It was just the first one she found. The affair had been going on for 14 months with Renata, who had done consulting work for the firm's marketing division, and who had apparently concluded that Vincent's wife was, as she reportedly told a friend, not really a threat. Celeste did not cry when she found the receipt. She sat in the kitchen of the house she had renovated, and she thought with a precision that scared her a little, about every conversation she had not had in the past 12 years, every opinion she had softened, every ambition she had deferred, every time she had made herself smaller so the room had more space for Vincent Hargrove. She thought about all of it for about 45 minutes. Then she called a lawyer. Not the one a mutual friend had recommended, but a different one, a woman named Patricia Wu, who operated out of a glass and steel office in downtown Toronto, and who had a reputation for being excessively, almost joyfully thorough. "Tell me everything you know about the firm's structure," Patricia had said at their first meeting. "That will take a while," Celeste said. "I have time," said Patricia. What Vincent did not know, what nobody at Caldwell and Hargrove knew, was that Celeste had spent the long, quiet years of her marriage doing something that looked like nothing from the outside. She had been taking the small consulting fees she earned through the community foundation work, through private advisory conversations she'd had with 2 family offices she'd met through a neighbor's dinner party, and through a freelance portfolio management arrangement she maintained under her maiden name, Okafor, and she had been quietly, methodically deploying that capital. Not in flashy things. She had no interest in flashy things. She bought distressed positions in small firms that she understood better than their current holders. She structured a private holding company, Lakeshore Advisory Group, that existed on paper with all the excitement of a dental appointment. It appeared in no social media. It appeared in no conversations with Vincent. It appeared over 14 months of patient accumulation, in the shareholder registry of Caldwell and Hargrove Capital. Vincent had restructured his personal equity to protect himself in the divorce. He had been very clever about that. What he had not been clever about was monitoring the preferred share registry, because the preferred shares didn't vote, and they didn't matter much individually, and nobody with serious intentions bought preferred shares quietly over 14 months. Nobody who was planning to go to battle at the negotiation table. But Celeste was not planning to go to the negotiation table. She was planning to sit in the boardroom. Patricia had reviewed the Lakeshore position and gone very still for a moment. "This is enough to trigger a mandatory consultation clause," she said finally. "In the original shareholder agreement. Section 14, subsection C," Celeste said. "I know. Vincent doesn't know you hold this." "No, Celeste." Patricia had looked at her across the desk with something that was not quite professional detachment. "How long have you been planning this?" Celeste had thought about it. "I haven't been planning it exactly," she said. "I've been preparing. There's a difference. Planning assumes you know what's going to happen. I was just making sure I'd have something to work with, whatever happened." The morning of the board meeting, Celeste had taken the GO train because her car was genuinely in the shop. A cracked serpentine belt, nothing dramatic, and she had eaten the granola bar because she had genuinely forgotten to buy groceries. Because she had been on calls until 11 the previous night with the legal team. The Value Village blazer was real. She had bought it 2 winters ago and she liked it, and she had not replaced it because she had been spending her money on other things. She had not dressed down strategically. She had simply not dressed up. This distinction mattered to her. In the boardroom, Vincent stared at the document. His jaw had not quite closed. Douglas, the CFO, had picked up his own copy. Celeste's lawyer had provided 12, one for each board member, delivered to the reception desk 40 minutes before the meeting began, and was reading it with the expression of a man watching a building fall over slowly. This is, Vincent started, 14.7% of preferred shares, Celeste said, which, under the original shareholder agreement that your own father drafted, triggers mandatory board consultation rights in the event of any proposed structural change to the firm, which is exactly what you're voting on today. She nodded at the agenda that had been printed and placed at each seat before she arrived. Agenda Item 3, Proposed Restructuring of Equity Distribution. You can't be serious, Renata said from her seat beside Vincent. She had no official position in this room. She was there as Vincent's guest, in the vague way that powerful men sometimes brought their companions to places they didn't belong. You're trying to extort him. Celeste looked at Renata for a long moment. I don't believe we've formally met, she said. I'm Celeste. I'm Vincent's wife. And this is a board meeting, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't speak unless you've been appointed to a role with speaking rights. Which you haven't. Renata opened her mouth. Renata. Vincent's voice was flat. He was looking at the document. His face had done something complicated and then settled into something carefully blank, the way it did when he was calculating. How? He said quietly. I worked, Celeste said. While you were golfing in Edinburgh. While you were at the Canmore conference. While you were. She stopped. She had decided months ago that she would not perform her pain in this room. She would not let them see her grieve. I worked, she repeated. I'm good at it, I always was. Douglas set down his copy of the document. The Section 14 clause is real, he said, to nobody in particular. I remember when Hargrove Sr. insisted on it. It was meant to protect against hostile external acquisitions, Vincent said. It was meant to protect minority shareholders from structural decisions that affected their position without consultation, Celeste said. Which is exactly what Agenda Item 3 is. You're proposing to restructure equity distribution in a way that will dilute the preferred share value by approximately 11% over 3 years. My position, without consulting me. You weren't a shareholder when this meeting was scheduled. I've been a shareholder for 14 months, Celeste said. The meeting scheduling is irrelevant. The room was very quiet. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows the Toronto skyline sat bright and indifferent in the winter light. Lake Ontario was visible from the east-facing windows, flat and pewter gray. Vincent looked at her across the table. The look on his face was one she recognized. She had seen it twice before, once when a deal he was certain about had collapsed, and once when his father had called to say the family cottage was being sold. It was the look of a man remapping reality. What do you want, Celeste? He said. Her name in his mouth sounded different than it used to. I want what I'm entitled to, she said, under both the shareholder agreement and the matrimonial property law. Patricia. She turned to the door and her lawyer walked in, right on time, because they had rehearsed this, has prepared an amended settlement proposal. It reflects the actual value of my contributions to this marriage, including the renovation of the Oakville property, the community foundation work, the 12 years of operational and social support enabled you to build what you built, and my current shareholder position. Patricia placed a bound document in front of Vincent. It was thicker than the original settlement offer. Considerably thicker. Vincent did not open it. He was looking at Celeste. You sat across from me at dinner every night, he said. His voice was low enough that only she could hear. We talked about the firm. You never asked, Celeste said. Not harshly, factually. You talked about the firm. I listened. You assumed that was the whole arrangement. I let you assume it because I was too tired to fight you on it. She gathered her folder. I'm not tired anymore. She stood up. The rest of the board, to their credit, was now very interested in the documents in front of them, and not in anything Vincent was doing. I'll give you 72 hours to review the proposal, Celeste said. Patricia's office will send the contact information for next steps. And regarding Agenda Item 3, I'll be exercising my consultation rights formally, which means the vote needs to be deferred until my position has been properly considered. She picked up her folder and her tote bag, the same battered canvas one she'd carried in, with a coffee stain on the left strap from a thermos lid that hadn't seated properly 6 months ago. She walked to the door. Celeste. Vincent's voice stopped her, but not the way it used to. It was smaller now. The settlement you're asking for is fair, she said without turning around. For the first time in this process, it's actually fair. She walked out. The next 72 hours were not quiet. Vincent's legal team called Patricia's office 7 times in the first day. There were 2 competing appraisals ordered for the Oakville property. An accountant Vincent had retained tried to recharacterize the Lakeshore Advisory position as a marital asset subject to equal division rather than an independent holding, a creative argument that Patricia dismantled in a 4-paragraph email that her assistant described later as having made the accountant visibly deflate. On the second day, Renata sent Celeste a direct message on Instagram, which Celeste did not read. On the second night, Vincent called Celeste's cell phone at 9:47. She was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of rooibos tea and a spreadsheet, and she let it go to voicemail. He called again at 9:51. She let that go too. He didn't leave a message either time. On the third morning, Patricia called. "They're accepting the proposal," she said, "with 2 minor modifications to the timeline on the Lakeshore position transfer. I think we can accommodate those." Celeste set down her tea. She looked out the kitchen window at the backyard at the vegetable garden that had gone dormant for the winter, the neat rows covered in a light frost. She had planted that garden in the second year of their marriage. It had been the first thing that was entirely hers. "Okay," she said. "Celeste, this is..." Patricia paused. "This is a significant outcome." "I know," Celeste said. "Are you all right?" She thought about the question. "Yeah," she said. "I think I actually am." The settlement, when it was signed, was not the number that made the business pages. Those would come later, when the shareholder restructuring at Caldwell and Hargrove played out over the following months, and Celeste's Lakeshore position became relevant to a story. 2 financial journalists were separately writing about governance gaps at mid-sized capital firms. The settlement was, simply, what 12 years of work was actually worth. She used part of it to buy a small apartment in West End, near High Park. She walked the park most mornings, early before the dog walkers arrived in force. She registered Lakeshore Advisory as an operating firm with 2 junior analysts she hired from the Western Finance Program, the same one she'd graduated from, and a part-time operations manager named Claudette who had 30 years of Bay Street experience and a dry, absolute competence that Celeste respected immediately. She declined 4 interview requests in the first month after the story broke. She accepted one, from a financial journalist at the Globe, because the journalist was a woman who had covered the governance gap story carefully, and without sensationalizing it, and because the resulting piece was a profile of Lakeshore Advisory and its investment philosophy, not a revenge narrative. "People keep wanting to frame this as a revenge story," Celeste told the journalist. They were sitting in the Lakeshore office, which occupied half a floor of a modest building near Union Station and smelled of fresh paint and good coffee. "Isn't it?" the journalist asked. Celeste looked at her. "I built a company," she said. "I've been building it for years." The boardroom moment that was one morning. One document. She shook her head. "The story is everything before that, the actual work. That's the part nobody wants to write about. Because it's less dramatic, because it's harder," Celeste said. "Drama is easy. Years of quiet work is hard. Getting up every day when nobody's watching and building something anyway. That's what actually changes your life." The boardroom was just the day it became visible. The journalist wrote that down. She also wrote down what Celeste said at the end of the interview, standing to leave, pulling on a coat. Not the Value Village blazer but a wool overcoat from a small Canadian designer she had started buying from, because she liked their work and wanted to support it. "Do you have any regrets?" the journalist asked. Celeste thought about it properly, the way she thought about everything. "I regret the years I spent making myself smaller," she said. "Not for Vincent's sake. I don't think I did it for him really. I did it because I was afraid of how big I might actually be. That fear cost me some time." She buttoned the coat. "But you know what you can do with lost time if you're paying attention." "What's that?" the journalist asked. Celeste smiled. It was the same smile that had unsettled her lawyer 6 weeks earlier, in the Mississauga office when the settlement offer came through. "You can build something that takes it all back," she said. "And then some." She walked out and the door closed behind her, and through the glass wall of her office the 2 junior analysts at their desks looked up briefly and then went back to their work. And the city outside the windows went on being exactly what it always was. Enormous, indifferent, and full of people who were quietly becoming something nobody had expected. Celeste Okafor was already there.